I'm back again, guys, with another Star Ocean and Divine Force build video, and we're going to be discussing Albaird's late game, 90 plus. We're going to jump straight into it. It's going to be fairly similar to the last build video because I pumped out his first video decently later on in the game because that's when I started to understand his kit a little more. Albaird functions as a high physical damage and magic damage character. He's very much a hybrid. And I think that's when you're getting the most usage out of him. I think the most useful path to start him off on is definitely the magical side, and it's because of Demon's Gate. Demon's Gate works like a singularity that's going to pull the enemies together, and then you're just going to use your physical attacks to spam through there, or even some of the spells. Looking at his stats, his ATK can be closer to his magic damage, but I do think his magic damage will pass it up by a bit. As long as you're keeping those decently close together, you should be fine. Especially if you can find two crafted items that are high on both ends. You can give him one really high ATK item and then one high accessory that's giving him magic damage. We're foregoing HP, defense, and guts. Same thing with the resistances, at least for now. You can definitely pick those up later at your own leisure. But since this is a DPS focused build, we're not going to prioritize those. We'll look at his skill tree first because I feel like he has one of the more simpler skill trees. So the magic path is the bottom side of it and the physical side is the top side. So if we're looking at the magical side, you're going to need Shadow Remnants. It's an essential spell, especially for making his Fireball and his Ice Sword more worth using. So he'll be able to fire out extra projectiles than just that single shot. It can fire up to like 3 or 4, I believe. It's a lot more worth than the single versions. And when you level these up, you get a factor that increases the amount of int or magic damage that he'll do for these successive attacks. So he's meant to spam Ice Sword and Fireball if you're curious about that. In terms of everything else you're grabbing, you're going to focus on grabbing the int stat first and skipping the defense. Spring of Wisdom is something you're going to grab because it's going to bestow 77 int for 10 seconds, and this is at level 9, so it can go even higher than this. It is at the cost of guts, but I feel like that's a small thing to be losing, especially when you think about the reward of 77% magic damage coming from yourself, plus whatever other buffs you get from your teammates or Duma, however you have your entire party set up. Then we're going to keep pathing down this way. Extend dodge is something that's very good if you're using the character, not so much if you're not using the character. So that's a situational one right there. And then Demon's Gate, one of the best moves that his kit has to offer, snatching all the enemies to the center and dealing magic damage through the form of earth. Scaling up to 342, that is, I believe, his highest damage dealing ability that he has to offer, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that is definitely his best damage dealing move. So highly recommend it. It's nice crowd control. Bosses are no exception to this. They will get pulled into the middle. So highly recommend doing that. And an interesting combo I just thought of not too long ago was Shadowbind in conjunction with Demon's Gate. So the idea would be for you to Shadowbind the enemy first and then follow up with a Demon's Gate. This is a very AP demanding combo, so make sure you have at least 10 bars or more, because you'll both will be asking for about 9 together. So 4 and then 5, so yeah, you'll be asking for 9. So Shadow Bind the enemy first. That's going to decrease their movement speed, so that means they won't be able to outrun the Demon Gate. There are some enemies that do have high movement speed, so they will get away from it, but Shadow Bind will get rid of that opportunity for them to do so. So that way they have to take the damage over time of the gravity orb and then take whatever physical damage that you throw through the Demon's Gate. And that'll lead us to the upper portion of our tree now. So that is when we'll start to focus on grabbing as many of the ATK swords as possible, and we'll also start to cover some of these passives that I don't have grabbed and abilities as well. For a longer punishment, the reason why I haven't grabbed this is because I haven't encountered too many moves on this character that are actually going to apply some sort of status ailment in the first place. Demon's Gate does not do that. His Ice Needle or Ice Sword doesn't do that, and neither does Fireball. Shadow Remnants, to my knowledge, doesn't do anything either once you level it up, so I'm not really sure what elements he's applying at all. Um, Taking a peek at some of these other abilities, that's more of a defensive one, and this one is another physical one. So, I mean, it's possible that it could be meant for his barrier, but if that's really only used for one skill, I don't believe this is worth picking up because you're not getting the maximum value out of it because you're not using it the entire time you're in combat. So I think you can skip out on that one. Auto healing's a good one to do as a long range character. Let yourself regenerate when you inevitably get hit by something, and you're waiting for a heal, or if to just stack auto healing on top of the heals that you're getting. I had a question about rainy day fun the other day. If you are concerned with your money gain because you don't do a whole bunch of fighting, or if you're doing a whole bunch of fighting and you're trying to stack as much money as possible, rainy day fun can be good for that. I don't think overall this is something that should stick necessarily on your passive skills. I think you should, generally speaking, make your passive skills set to make up for your flaws in combat. So if you're constantly, getting interrupted, you want to try to find something like no guard. Or if you're having trouble with survivability because you're getting hit with one combo and then you're out, probably want to look for first aid. And if you're having regeneration problems, you're probably going to be looking towards auto healing. But rainy day fun is good for stacking money, especially if you get the accessories that also have factors that increase your money. You can double that up. The effect will stack. Um, Vitality Drive, I don't believe you need this. Increasing his defense to me just doesn't really make sense. His entire kit is geared towards doing damage. I see no real value in trying to make a tanky Albaird, or even a bruiser-esque, like half damage, half tank. So I think you should just skip out on this ability. Quick usage and is an ability that is situational to you if you're actually using the stop menu a whole lot. I don't believe it has a whole lot of value. I think you should focus on stuff that's kind of automatically there, or just based off of a certain situation, like getting closer to the enemy, getting behind the enemy, or just, regenerative purposes. Barrier, I think you can skip out on this move as well. I don't want to count on things to hit me in this game. I like to just blindside them as they're about to go for the attack. And honestly, if you are using the stop menu, one good use for it is if you hear somebody casting semiomancy, or if you think you're about to get hit, hit the stop button and then, cycle through your targets instead and then plan your move accordingly from there, other than trying to sit still and commit to a barrier animation when you can probably get flanked. So I wouldn't use that one. I'd skip out on that as well. Heavy usage is another one I skip out on. Weapons Expert is one that I would actually recommend buying. The only reason I don't have it purchased at this point is because I didn't have any weapon factors that were amazing to me at the time. And in the early game, a lot of the factors are kind of lackluster. And then if you're going to replace the weapon anyway, you might get a new weapon that doesn't even have a factor. So for late game crafting purposes, this is something you will want to max because you want to get the most out of whatever that weapon factor is, whether it's adding a certain elemental damage type or, possibly some extra damage or towards a certain type of creature or however that ends up turning out to manifest. So Weapon Expert is something that'll actually affect his damage that he's dealing, so 100% go for that. Continue up the middle with the ATK swords. Guillotine is a nice one for crowds of enemies, especially if you do that combo with the Shadow Bind and the Demon's Gate. You could definitely start a combo off with a guillotine and then hit everybody in there. You're going to continue to path upwards. We're going to float up this way and grab his hardest damage dealing physical move. And these are the two moves I typically spam in like a sequence. Whenever I'm trying to really fry a boss or even a big group of ads, I always Demon's Gate first and then into this move. It's going to spin through, hit everybody, and then explode one more time. And it only costs 3 AP, which is pretty nice, considering that the Demon's Gate itself is 4, so it's only asking for 7 AP. That's pretty generous, because most very high damage dealing combos are asking for like 10. That's pretty nice. You can definitely just spam that over and over as your high damage combo. And that's pretty much all you'll need. Hide is an ability that I don't feel is very useful for an active skill. I mean, if you want to be invisible, by all means, sure. But if you're worried about being targeted, I think Shadowbind would be a lot better for you, because if the fight starts and you destroy their movement speed and then force them to get pulled to this dark hole, well, then there's no reason to hide. You're going to want to just lock them down in place and then do all the damage you want to them. Let's look at strengthening skills. So when it comes to passive skills, he doesn't have a whole lot to me that's like super crucial. It's just background stuff to help you out. Weapons expert will be the one thing I would recommend grabbing as like an essential thing, and the rest are more of how you're playing. You could make an argument for extend dodge being essential, because as a long range character, you're probably going to be doing more dodging than the average person. But if you're not perfect dodging, you're not getting the effect. So when you're hitting a good or well timed dodge, you're going to be extending your invulnerability window, which is pretty nice, because if there's successive spammy attacks, you'll just walk away, taking no damage, just completely unscathed. And then rainy day fun, of course, if you're just building up money, you'll have that. I 100% recommend maxing Spring of Wisdom, as it'll go to 80%. This is basically the magic version of Berserk. You're going to be getting 80% magic damage for 10 seconds. That'll translate to somewhere around 15 to 16 if you have the S3 Cage extend buff. And it's nice because if you have the defense up on that S3 Cage, you can bring up some of the stats that you just lost. So something to consider doing earlier on in the game, because it'll make your Demon's Gate hit harder, your Firebolt, your Ice Sword as well. So definitely level that up. And then into his other combat, or into the combat skills. So combat wise, I like to max the most damage dealing moves first. That's Demon's Gate, and then this one right here. These two do the most damage, and this is going to be your actual go-to combo for single target and for groups, which is actually kind of crazy. You won't have to worry about super complex combos with this character, because he's pretty straightforward. If you want to make sure all your damage is going to hit, you should definitely start a combo off with Demon's Gate, and then after that, it's pretty much flavoring. I highly recommend following up with this, because it's your heaviest damage dealing physical move. They're not going to be able to run through it, so it's going to pass through everybody. But you could 100% afterwards go for leveling up Fireball, as it's going to see, you see the factor down below. It says chance of causing 60% int for 1.5 seconds. So he'll be able to do a lot extra damage. In addition to Spring of Wisdom, I might add, if you have that on. So if you Spring of Wisdom and then activate your S3 case to make that buff last longer and to damage buff yourself even further, spamming fireballs would be pretty crazy, because you're going to be able to get 60% on top of that 80% and on top of the Duma damage buff that you get for putting it in S3 cage. So there's definitely some potential there for completely annihilating enemies weak to fire. Same thing goes for the Ice Sword. It gets the same exact passive. Just remember, if you are going to spam out Fireball or Ice Sword, drop Shadow Remnants first, as Shadow Remnants is going to allow you to fire out more projectiles instead of that single Fireball and single Ice Sword. It will shoot out like 4 or 5, further probably increasing the chances of making that 60% happen. If you look at the factor for this one, time remaining for the chakram is 10 seconds. So you won't have to recast this as much whenever you level this up. So highly recommend doing that, because this move is not something you want to spam, because it doesn't actually do anything itself, other than a setup to allow Fireball and Ice Sword shoot more projectiles, so that the moves are more worth it to do. Because if you look at their power isn't that great, but the creep is there if you do Spring of Wisdom, S3 Cage, then you do Shadow Remnants, then you start spamming either Fireball or Ice Sword. Um, in terms of his physical moves that you could spam, um, I'm not a fan of double circle slash and flash stream, mainly because this character strikes me more as a mid to long range character. So I would not recommend getting up close because we are not specking into any defense. So if anything, flying guillotine him and then leave it at that. Stay as far away as possible. You can, of course, pick up Pierceless if you want to throw way more than just that one flying guillotine. And that'll be it for strengthening the skills. For setting up his chain combos, I'm a fan of, like I said, I'm a fan of starting with Demon's Gate and then that highest damage dealing physical move because it'll phase through all the enemies, and then spamming another one after that if you have the AP to do so, which you should be able to because you can have up to, you can definitely have more than 10 bars. So this is a very feasible combo to have if you're farming as Demon's Gate them and then spam these two moves out. I actually wouldn't recommend having Fireball on a hold move, and I think what I would recommend for you to put here instead is Shadow Remnants, because this is not a move you want to spam. If you are going to be doing Fireball spamming or Ice Sword spamming, you want to Shadow Remnants first, and then do something where it's like a whole bunch of Fireballs in a row. For example, because then you would be able to further go into that passive that you get for Fireball and Ice Sword. That's that 60% extra magic damage chance that can proc. It's viable to spam Demon's Gate, especially if there's an enemy weak to Earth. The damage will reset and the portal will, or the singularity will reappear to snatch the enemy in. Remember, this does work on bosses, so if there's a boss like really pissing you off, getting in your face, drop a Demon's Gate and he'll have to resist the pull from that. And if you follow up with, let's go ahead and throw this on here. Oh, Shadow Binds. So I didn't purchase Shadow Binds, but if you get Shadow Binds, and I'll show you one more time on the tree, Shadow Bind will actually allow for you to slow the enemy. So 100% grab this and throw this on one of your held down buttons, because you want to always have the option to really hinder the enemy when the situation suits you to do so. So you can start off shadow binding them to slow their movement speed, and then once you're a safe distance away, or just go ahead and spam out the Demon's Gate. You can blindside them and then spam the Demon's Gate, and then they'll be trying to outrun your movement speed debuff and the pull of the Demon's Gate. So they're being forced into that damage, which is pretty insane. And then for a melee combo, especially something that's not demanding much AP, you can definitely always go for a Flying Guillotine into a Pierceless, or you can just spam out Flying Guillotines if there's somebody with lower HP and you really don't want to use a big portion of your AP. But this is a pretty fast animation to be asking for 5 AP. I guess that's the trade-off for this move, especially. And then if you wanted to keep it physical, you could follow up with the highest damage dealing physical move as well. But if you are going to go for a spell spamming combo, I highly recommend it to look like this. Basically just having 3 fireballs in a row. If you wanted to hybrid it, you could 100% put an Ice Sword there, but I would recommend something like this, so that way you can just button, you basically just button mash at that point. You would start off opening up with your Shadow Remnants, so you can get that extra projectiles for whatever spell you're casting, and then just spam out the fireballs to farm out that 60% buff on top of your Spring of Wisdom and any other damage buff that you have. Because if you think about it, you can have Spring of Wisdom giving you extra damage, Shadow Remnants, the passive to the ability, Nina, and oh yeah, so you're having like 4 to probably 5 damage buffs going, or things that are going to affect your damage and helping it spike upwards. So highly recommend setting up a magical combo like that. But yeah, your bread and butter is Demon's Gate into this high damage dealing physical move, and Albaird is good to go for most of his damage. His equipment, at least for like stuff that you're buying from the stores, definitely recommend getting a Berserker Bangle and then grabbing a Sage Bangle. Since he was somebody in the back line of my party, I just had him with a Scarf of Rage instead, which was decent for the middle game. But he's set up two similar hybrid characters, so grab him at least one of each, unless you're just seeing noticeable damage from the Dark Hole, because that one should do more damage technically than that physical damage move, since it has a higher int stat number in comparison to the ATK number. So that is how I would set up my late game Albaird build. You really wouldn't need much else from that tree. If you wanted to just grab it all once you hit 255, absolutely go for it. But in terms of completing the game, that is the essential stuff for a high damage build for him. It'll be incredibly useful because he'll always be strong. He'll be very good at enemies who are weak to physical damage, and he'll be good at enemies weak to magical damage because he has three different elements to pull from: fire, water, and earth. That is it for me. I've been X 1000, and I will catch you guys in the next build video.